Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Tonight we're going to be discussing, the topic is the Pruzbul, or the Pruzbul, or the Pruzbul, or the Pruzbul. I'm not sure exactly, we'll figure out how to pronounce it. And its relevance both at the beginning and end of Shemittah. And as we'll see, this is a shtickle misubach. It's a little bit complicated in the sense that we have a diversity of opinion as to when the Pruzbul is supposed to be drawn and when the Pruzbul is supposed to be enacted. First, we're going to define what a Pruzbul is. For those who may have some familiarity with it, there's some new issues that we're going to be discovering as well. I neglected to, when I copied the psukim from Devarim, I left off 2 psukim, so I'm going to say those Baal Peh. But let's first see at the psukim that we have in front of us from Parshas Re'eh, Perek Tesvav, that's source number 1. The Torah says, Miketz Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shemittah. At the end of 7 years, you shall do a cancellation. That's what the word Shemittah means, literally a cancellation of whatever you're normally doing, right? Shamot. And said, the Torah says, V'zeh davar ha-Shemitah. This is the matter of the cancellation. Kol Baal Masheh Yado Asher Yashem B'Re'ehu. Any creditor who has the ability to press his debtor for the payment of a loan, Lo Yigoses Re'ehu Besachiv. He shall not put pressure on his friend or his brother, Ki Kara Shemitah L'Hashem, because this man has declared Shemitah. Now, if you notice, the Torah says at the end of 7 years, this is what's supposed to happen. So even the pshat of the psukim implies that the cancellation of debts takes place at the end of Shemitah, not at the beginning of Shemitah. Now, Tavshin Ayin Hey is a Shemitah year. So you should be saying to yourselves, well, what's this crazy rabbi talking about cancellation of debts? It's a year too early. We should be talking about this at the end of year 7. So we're going to talk about that and why it's relevant to us before Shemitah actually starts. And then the Torah says, you can surely still collect outstanding debts from a non-Jew, but that which belongs to your brother, you must cancel that loan. So there's the principle of cancellation of all loans upon the end of the Shemitah year. Miketz Sheva Shanim, at the end of 7 years. Now, the psukim later on in Pasuk Vav and Pasuk Zayin say as follows: maybe there will be something rebellious in your heart to say, you know what? The 7th year is about to come, the year of Shemitah. And you'll have an evil eye, so to speak. In other words, you'll have this kind of miserly attitude towards your poor friend who needs a loan, because velo sitein lo, and you won't give him the money that he needs in order to provide sustenance for himself and his family, because you're going to say to yourself, look, Shemitah's coming, and in just a matter of a few months or a little bit over a year, I'm not going to be able to collect the loan anymore. So the Torah therefore tells you, don't have that attitude. Nason titein lo v'lo yera levavecha b'sitecha lo ki biglal hadavar hazeh. Right? Don't feel bad about it. Give him the money, lend him the money, and this is the whole basis why Hashem is giving you this beautiful land. So that's what the Torah says in Parshas Re'eh. So I apologize for leaving off Psukim Vav and Zayin. You can take a look at them in the Chumash later on. Now the Sefer HaChinuch, in discussing this mitzvah, Kedarko B'Kodesh, as you know, always discusses the reasons or attempts to explain to us why this is. Why does the Torah have this law that at the end of the Shemitah year, all debts between 2 Jews are erased? Now, as we'll see, it's not all debts, but it's many debts are erased. And why is that? So he says, Kavar kasafti bekesef talve, the mitzvah shvius ase revisim in samech tes, mitzvah pei dalid. He says, I've already explained in Parshas Mishpatim, when we were first introduced to the mitzvah of Shemitah, Mashi Adati B'Shorish HaMitzvah. Whatever I feel is appropriate to discuss about what the whole purpose of Shemitah is. And there the Sefer HaChinuch tells us that really the whole function of the mitzvah of Shemitah is to instill within the Jewish people that sense of bitachon. Don't think it's kochi va'otzim yadi. Don't think it's your own might that allows you to have provisions, but rather it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who provides for us all. And you really have to demonstrate that actively when you're living in Eretz Yisrael in the Shemitah year, and especially when you're a farmer, you have to show a sense of bitachon that Hashem will provide. So he says, based on that, ushmitas ksafim gam ken achar oso hatam nimshach. That's the very same reason why Hashem decrees that there should be a cancellation of debts in the Shemitah year. L'lamed nafshenu b'midos ha'meulos midas ha'nedivus v'ayin tov. It is to train us to have these praiseworthy characteristics of generosity and having a good eye and being nice to other people and not being miserly, not being begrudging. V'nikva bilvavenu habitachon hagadol b'shem baruch hu. And it is to establish and ensconce within our hearts that great trust in Hashem that He will provide. V'az tichshar nafshenu lekabel tov me'es adon hakol kalul haberacha ve'harachamim. And in training ourselves with the traits of kindness to others, generosity to others, and trust in Hashem, we will therefore be only benefiting ourselves by making ourselves worthy beneficiaries of all of Hashem's gifts in life. By refining who we are as people, we make ourselves more worthy of receiving Hashem's gifts. Okay? Gam nimsa mizeh gader chazak u'michitza shel barzel. And he says there's an additional benefit, says the Sefer HaChinuch. He says it creates a very strong iron wall for us. Lihisrachek ma'od min hagazel u'min hachemda b'chol asher l're'enu. To distance ourselves from any kind of theft or even coveting that which belongs to our fellow. Ki nisa kal v'chomer b'nafshenu lomar. Because we can make certainly a logical argument as follows. Afilu hilvisiv mamoni. V'higia shenas hashmita amar Torah lahashmit b'yodo hamilva. That even when I lent a person my own money, I gave him my money as a loan. And yet the Torah says I've got to forget about it. And I've got to leave that money that I lent the fellow with him. Shelo ligzol, surely then I'll make a kal v'chomer. Shelo ligzol v'shelo lachmos mishalo lo kol shekein shorei lo lihisrachek ad hakatzeh ha'acharon. Then surely it'll help teach me and educate me about how I have to respect other people's property. If I can't even collect my own money from someone to whom I've lent money, then surely I'll have this training to respect that which belongs to others, and I'll never come to steal or try to take something that really is not rightfully mine. So that's sort of the theme and the connection between the cancellation of debts and the mitzvah of Shemitah, of having a sabbatical year for the land. Both of them require me to be generous to others, allow people to come onto my field and take, and they also require me both to have bitachon in Hashem, that Hashem will take care of me. And the cancellation of debts, as a side benefit, says the Sefer HaChinuch, also trains me to respect other people's property. Okay, now let's go on to the Gemara. Any questions now about cancellation of debts? It's a very straightforward halacha. The question is, does it apply bisman hazeh or not? So we're going to see this in the Gemara as well. Tanan hasa. Pruzbul eno mishameh. Sometimes it's spelled with a zayin and sometimes it's spelled with a samech, because as we'll see, it's really a Greek word, and as such, it doesn't have one uniform spelling in Aramaic. So Pruzbul eno mishameh, that if a person does this mechanism called a Pruzbul, that it does not cancel debts in Shemitah. Zeh echad min hadevarim shehiskin Hillel hazaken. This is one of the things that the Hillel, the elder, during Bayit Sheni instituted. Why? Why did he institute a sort of a legal loophole to prevent debts from being canceled? By the way, this is one of those instances where you have to be a little bit critical of Wikipedia. Wikipedia, probably from some old Hebrew encyclopedia, says that this is one of the most famous legal fictions that exists within Judaism. That's the way it's defined. You can do a Google on Pruzbul tonight. But the truth is, it's not a legal fiction. It's that in itself is a fiction. To suggest that it's a legal fiction is a fiction. It's a legal reality. The question is, to what level, to what distance is there elasticity within halacha, and what right did Hillel have? What right did Hillel have to really contravene a biblical law of the cancellation of debts? We're going to see that as well. So, Shira'a es ha'am shenimnu milahal bo zeh. Hillel noticed that people were neglecting to lend each other money. Va'avru al masher kasav b'Torah, and people were violating the law in the Torah, and I mentioned this pasuk ba'al peh. Hishamer lecha pen yeh devar im levavecha v'liyalo v'goymer. Be very careful. Let there not be something rebellious in your heart stirring that compels you to say, I'm not going to lend someone money because Shemitah is approaching. And therefore, when he saw people were violating the Torah outright, Amad v'hiskin Pruzbul, he went ahead and instituted this legal loophole. V'sehu gufo shel Pruzbul. And this is the way that the Pruzbul works. You go over to the Beis Din and you say, Mosreini lachem ploni. This is all from the Gemara in Gittin. Mosreini lachem ploni dayanim shebemokom ploni. I hereby, and you write this out in a contract, and you say as follows: I hereby submit to you judges of the following name, and who reside in the following place. Shekol chov she'etz li etzel ploni she'egvenu kol zman she'ertzeh. That whatever debts I have that to collect against so-and-so, in other words, so-and-so owes me $1,000, and I know that he may not pay me until the time of Shemitah, by giving over the debt to you and making it your debt instead of my debt, I will just now be collecting the debt on behalf of Beis Din, and that's legal, because once Beis Din gets involved, then Beis Din have the power to reappropriate funds. We know that there's a principle of Hefker based in Hefker, and no longer is there a principle of lo yigos. Remember, what does the Torah say? That you're not allowed to personally oppress another Jew by pressing him to pay back the debt, by putting pressure on him to pay back the debt. Well, once it's in the hands of Beis Din, there's no longer the possibility of me being a noges, of me being personally pressuring someone else to pay it back. Because it's not my debt anymore, it's considered to be in the hands of Beis Din. So therefore, I am contravening the entire process of lo yigos, and that's why it's legal for me to collect the debt. So, v'hadayonim chosmim lamata o ha'edim. And then the judges, either the judges or the witnesses sign. What does the Gemara mean when it says either the judges or the witnesses sign? Because as the poskim point out, there are two ways to do a Pruzbul. Either you do it in front of a Beis Din, or you do it in witnesses that you declare in front of the witnesses, there's a Beis Din that's down in another town, and I hereby submit my debt to that Beis Din that's in that other place. And as long as it's done in front of witnesses, then we assume that that Beis Din down the road will take responsibility for the debts. So now the Gemara says, this is the $64 question. Umi kamidi de midioraisa mishameta shvius v'hiskin hillel de lo mishamta. How could it be that if the Torah says that loans are canceled, that Hillel could have the chutzpah to contravene a Torah law? The Torah says that you can't do that. You can't pressure someone to pay it back because the debt is now canceled. How could Hillel say that the debt is not canceled? It almost sounds like the question that people ask about an Eruv. Also, they call that a legal fiction. How can it be that the Torah says not to carry on the Sabbath, and the rabbis put a little string around the town, and they say now you can carry, hocus pocus? The Gemara knew this question. The Gemara was not oblivious to the challenge to the whole institution of Pruzbul. So how could he do this? So Amar Abaye, Abaye tells us a very important rule. Bashvius bisman hazeh, because Hillel was only addressing Shemitah nowadays, the halacha is like Rebbe, the Tanya, Rebbe Omer, v'zeh devar ha-Shemitah shamot. Rebbe says that this shall be the matter of Shemitah, shamot, that you shall cancel. That was in Pasuk Beis up above. Now the word Shemitah is in different forms is mentioned back to back in that Pasuk. Why do you have that double language of Shemitah, shamot? Bishtei Shmitos HaKosav Medaber. It's to tell you that the pasuk is talking about two different kinds of cancellations. What are we talking about? Echa Shmitas Karka ve'echa Shmitas Kesafim. There are two types of legal cancellations that take place in Jewish law. One is every 7 years with the cancellation of debts, and one is every 50 years with the cancellation of real estate sales. When does that happen? In Yovel. In every Yovel, whatever land was purchased reverts back to the original owner, and the sale is canceled. Okay? So the Torah, therefore, is connecting the laws of Yovel to the laws of Shemitah's Ksafim, to the law of cancellation of debts. Bizman she'ata mishamet karka, ata mishamet kesafim. Bizman she'iyata mishamet karka, iyata mishamet kesafim. So therefore, the only time that the cancellation of debts works biblically, is true biblically, is only when the laws of Yovel are extant. But when Yovel is not extant anymore, which means nowadays Yovel is not extant, then the law that debts are canceled is not biblical. In other words, biblically, the guy still owes you the money, and the rabbis basically cancel the debt on his behalf because they can say hefker based in hefker. V'takinu rabbanim tishamet zecher lashavias. And the rabbis came along and they said, to remind us what will happen when Mashiach comes and there'll be an ingathering of all the exiles, and we'll have the Yovel once again, we're going to need to know how the practice of cancellation of debts happens every 7 years. And so therefore we'll continue the practice even though Yovel is no longer extant. Ra Hillel shenimnu ha'am elahavos ze'ezeh amad behiskin Pruzbul. But then, at a later generation, after this institution of Shemitah Ksafim D'Rabbanan was instituted, Hillel saw that there was more damage being done than good. Because what was happening? There's a mitzvah saseh in the Torah to lend your friend money. And because of this rabbinic enactment that cancels debts at the end of the Shemitah year, people were no longer fulfilling the biblical commandment to lend people money. So therefore, Hillel said, you know what? Better that we should figure out a way to cancel out the rabbinic law of Shemitah's Ksafim so that people will fulfill the biblical law of lending money. And therefore he instituted the concept of Pruzbul, which sort of short circuits the rabbinic law of Shemitah's Ksafim. It's a very important, this is the crucial point. You got to get this point, that Shemitah's Ksafim bisman hazeh is derabanan. And therefore there's no such thing as a rabbinic law, what they call a legal fiction, canceling a biblical law. It's heim amru veheim amru. The very same sages who instituted Shemitah's Ksafim D'Rabbanan, Hillel is part of that rabbinic community and therefore can rescind that rabbinic decree using the principle of Pruzbul, so that not that he just basically cancels it out, but he says that we're going to circumvent that rabbinic law by having another rabbinic, very creative principle so that we remind ourselves that the rabbinic principle is still intact, but at the same time, to avoid the damage of the biblical violation of not lending money, we're going to figure a way around it. It's very similar to the principle of Eruv once you think about it. And Eruv does not help you carry in a place where it is biblically prohibited to carry on Shabbos. It only helps you carry in a place where it's rabbinically prohibited to carry. That's another big misconception. And the rabbis therefore instituted the principle of Eruv Chatzeros to enable you to go to sort of cancel out the rabbinic law that prohibits you from carrying. Okay. Clear? So far, so good. Now, how do we know that Yovel is no longer extant? And when does Yovel become back into effect? So it's not dependent on a Beis HaMikdash. That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara in Erechin, in source number 5, tells us, it says that if you take a look in Erechin, Daf Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, the Brisa says, Mishagalu shevet Ruven b'shevet Gad v'chatzi shevet HaMenashe batlu Yovelos. Yovel stopped well into the First Temple era. In other words, it wasn't, Yovel apparently was not practiced in the Second Temple, because you need all 12 tribes living in Eretz Yisrael in order for Yovel to be practiced properly. Shenamar ukrasem diror ba'aretz l'chol yoshaveh, that there has to be liberty declared in the land, and all real estate reverts for all of the inhabitants, which means bisman shekol yoshveh aleha below bisman shegolu miktsasan. So that even if only a portion of the 12 tribes are in Golus, then you cannot have the Yovel being practiced. Now this is controversial.
They're always
No, from the time of Sancheriv. From the time of Sancheriv is when really things, the Golus really started, and Yovel was bata. But up until then, Bisman shegolu miksasan yachol yehayu aleha vehein me'uravin shevet binyamin b'Yehuda v'shevet Yehuda binyamin yehi Yovel noig. And then the Gemara goes even further. What if you have all 12 tribes, but the 12 tribes are not apportioned, separated, and distinguished properly, each tribe in its own territory? Let's say you have a whole cholent. You have Yehuda living in Binyamin's property, Binyamin living in Yehuda's property. Does Yovel still apply in that case? Talmud lomar l'chol yosheveha bisman sheyosheveha ki tikunan v'lo bisman she'ein me'uravim. So that seems to be what the Gemara is telling us, that even if you have all 12 tribes, but they're mixed up together, and they're not living in their individual respective territories, even then Yovel would not apply. So it's very hard. There's a discussion about the laws of Shemitah, whether it's Deorais or Derabanan Bisman Hazeh, and some poskim say when you have a majority of Klal Yisrael living in Eretz Yisrael, the laws of Shemitah will revert from Rabbanan to Deoraisa, but that's not true about Yovel, at least according to this Gemara. By Yovel, and since the law of Shemitah's Ksafim is linked to the law of Yovel, then we don't anticipate, even when there's a majority Jewish population in Eretz Yisrael of world Jewry, the law of Shemitah's Ksafim will still only be Midarabanan, and it makes no difference whether it's inside or outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Just a little bit to add to our understanding of the word Pruzbul is in source number 4, which is later on in that Gemara in Gittin, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. The Gemara asks, "My Pruzbul, Amar Rav Chisda pros buliu buti." So it means that it's a rectification or an accommodation for both the wealthy and the poor. Buli elu ashirim. So the word buli applies to, wasn't there a song in the 60s? Buli.
Bully.
Yeah, sorry, I had to get it out. Okay, elu ashirim. This refers to the wealthy people, right? That refers to the wealthy people. Dichsiv v'shovarti es gaon uschem v'tani Rav Yosef elu bulaos shav. So this refers to the bulaot, that God talks about the breakage of the great prominence of the wealthy. So therefore, the word in Aramaic is bulaot. And buti elu ha'aniyim dichsiv ha'avet ta'aviten. You shall surely give a gift to the poor, and it's called buti. Amar le Rav la'oza my Pruzbul Amar le porsa de milsa. And Rabbi confirmed this to a person who was an expert in foreign languages, and the guy told him that it's a takana, it's an accommodation of the matter for the population. I just noticed in Philip Birnbaum's book, The Book of Jewish Concepts, he writes that the term Pruzbul is explained as a contraction of the Greek words prosbule, before the council, so that it doesn't just mean an accommodation for the rich and the poor, as the Gemara suggests, but it's submitting your promissory notes to a council, to the court. And this is what Hillel instituted, is giving over your shtaros to the Beis Din. Okay, let's take a look now at the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat Siman Samach Zayin tells us as follows in Seifim Lamed and Lamed Aleph. And this is going to be a bit of a mystery, how we're going to get from the Gemara to the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to go in between as well. The Shulchan Aruch writes, Ein Shavias Mishametes Ksafim Ela Bisofa. That Shemitah only cancels debts at the end of the Shemitah year, which means at the last second of the Shemitah year, meaning a year from this Erev Rosh Hashanah, that's when Shemitah cancels all debts. Lefichach, and it's for that reason, Hamalve es Chaviro Bashvias Atzma, Goy v'chobo kol hashana b'veisman. So therefore, even if Reuven lends Shimon money, even during the Shemitah year, there's no way for that debt to be canceled. You can collect it if the loan matures during the Shemitah year. You can oppress him and pressure him to pay it back to you. And you can even take him to Beis Din to collect your debt. But once the sun sets on the last day of the Shemitah year, then it's lost forever. Then the debt is canceled. Okay? So, and then the Shulchan Aruch writes, Kol zman shehu yachol ligvos hachov kosvin Pruzbul. That as long as you have the right to collect debts, which is throughout the entire Shemitah year until the very, very last second, you can write a Pruzbul to submit to Beis Din and use this sort of remedy of allowing your debts to not cancel. So you're going to say to me, so Rabbi, based on Sif Lamed and Lamed Aleph, we don't have to write a Pruzbul until a year from now, right? Very simple. So what are we doing having a shiur about this today? That's the question. It's a valid question. So take a look at the Torah. The Torah is the basis for the Mechaber's Shulchan Aruch, for Rav Yosef Kar Shulchan Aruch. It's written by the son of the Rosh. And the Torah says as follows. He says, "Ve'ein kosvin oso ela ad sof shana shishis," which is completely different from what we just saw in the Shulchan Aruch. What does the Torah say? That you only have until the end of the 6th year in which to write a Pruzbul. We're coming up to the end of the 6th year. Okay? Now, nichnas shana shvius afal pi she'ein mishametes adayin ela b'sofa afilu hachi ein kosvin osa. So listen to what the Torah says. The Torah says that even though the debts are not canceled until 1 year later, until the end of the 7th year, you do not have the ability to submit your debts to Beis Din after the beginning of the Shemitah year. Which means you've got to do this Pruzbul, which is this formal submission to Beis Din of your debts, before the Shemitah year starts. Which brings us to why we're having this discussion today.
How does the time of the Shulchan Aruch say when the people come malvis kaver bashvias atzma?
He's saying a chiddush. Not only if you lent the money before Shemitah, but even if you lent the money during Shemitah, don't worry about it because that deadline does not hit until the very end of Shemitah.
According to the Torah, he would have had to have written a Pruzbul before he made the loan.
Correct. So he'll have to do another Pruzbul after he makes that loan, which will turn out that according to the Torah, you'll have to make a Pruzbul at the end of the 6th year, and for the Torah, it'll be necessary either to make sure you collect all loans that you make at during the 7th year, or you'll have to just forget about the loans that you make during the 7th year. That's what the Torah is saying. Okay? The Machaber clearly disagrees with the Torah. We saw that. Yeah? So let's see why the Machaber disagrees with the Torah. Let's take a look at the Beis Yosef, which is the Machaber's commentary on the Torah, which eventually becomes the basis for the Shulchan Aruch. So the Beis Yosef in Siman Samach Zayin says as follows. Ve'ein kosvin oso ela ad sof shana shishis nichnas shana shvius afal pi she'ein mishametes adayin ela b'sofa afilu hachi ein kosvin oso. So the Beis Yosef first quotes the Torah, that even though the debts are not canceled until the end of the 7th year, but once the beginning of the Shemitah year starts, you can no longer write a Pruzbul. Kachi hanuscha hanechona b'sifrei Rabbeinu. This is the correct girsa in the words of the Torah. V'ta'amo, and what in the world is this reason for saying that? Midakasav harosh beperek hasholeach Tanya b'tosefta. There's a tosefta that says as follows. A Mosai kosvin lo Pruzbul erev Rosh Hashanah shel Shvi'is. That when is the proper time to write a Pruzbul? Says the Brisa, on the eve of the 7th year. Erev Rosh Hashanah of the Shemitah year. Not Erev Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year, Erev Rosh Hashanah of the Shemitah year. V'hu hadin koidem. And you could also write it before Erev Rosh Hashanah. V'lo bo lemayit ela b'shana hashvius de'afal gav d'shvius eina mishametes ela b'sofa afilu hachi ein kosvin Pruzbul ad kan l'shono. The Rosh says explicitly that even though there's no cancellation until the end of the 7th year, you cannot write a Pruzbul once the Shemitah year has started. The Kosav Od. So now we have to understand what's the Rosh's rationale. Now we know the Rosh says it. The question is, why does he say it? He says, V'hada in kosvin Pruzbul b'shvius afal pi she'ena mishametes ela b'sofa nira lefaresh hatam. So the Rosh suggests in his commentary to Masechah Shvius, I'd like to suggest the following reason. Al pi hamikraos, it's based on the psukim. If we go back to the psukim and look at them very carefully, we'll discover that the language of the psukim really tells us what's going on. It says, Miketz sheva shanim ta'aseh shemitah. It says that at the end of 7 years there'll be a cancellation. He says, V'zeh devar ha-shemitah shamot kol ba'al mashe yado. And this shall be the matter of the cancellation. You shall cancel anyone who has an outstanding debt. Mipashte dikra yalfinan de'ein shvius mishametes ela b'sofa k'dichsev miketz. Underline the word miketz. Miketz sheva shanim ta'aseh shemitah. Because you see very clearly from the pasuk that it's only at the end of the 7th year, which is what the word miketz means, at the end of, only then is there a cancellation of debts. V'zeh devar ha-shemitah she'enu ela b'sof sheva shamot kol ba'al mashe yado. Avol. So that's all indicated by pasuk Aleph and Beis. However, avol. Miyad kishihischila shenasa Shemittah ein based in niskakin legavos shum chov. However, and this is the big however, once the Shemitah year has begun, the Beis Din cannot be your representative to collect debts for you. V'gam hamalva ba'atzmo ein lo ligos haloveh. And similarly, the lender, the creditor, does not any longer have a right to pressure his debtor to pay back the loan. The loan still exists. This is the very strange category that the Rush describes. The loan still exists. The guy, Shimon, still owes Reuven the money. But during the Shemitah year, Reuven has no right to press Shimon to pay back the loan. I can't take him to Beis Din. I cannot sue him. I cannot litigate against him. He owes me the money, and Hashem will take him to task. But once Shemitah has started, I can no longer pressure him legally or otherwise in order to pay me back the debt. Why? Because Pasuk Bey says, you may not pressure your friend to pay back the debt because he calls it and he says, it's Shemitah. Which means, miyad shenichnas hashmita lo yigos. Which means that as soon as Shemitah starts, you may not sue someone or pressure him in order to get back your debt. Aval im yifra halova me'atzmo ein tzarich lomer mishametani uchamos she'en niskakin lagavos hachov kach ein niskakin lichtov Pruzbul miyad kishenichnasa shavias ad kan l'shono. So the Rush says as follows. What's the difference then between during Shemitah year and after Shemitah year? Once Shemitah is done, if you haven't done a Pruzbul, then the debt has been canceled. And if Shimon comes over to Reuven after Shemitah is over, and he says, here's the $1,000 that I owe you, Reuven legally has to say to Shimon, you don't owe me the money anymore. And I would be a ganaf taking the money from you if you think that you owe me this money. It is usher for me to take the money from you if you think that this is for the repayment of a debt. Once Reuven tells that, this is, by the way, this is the halacha. Once Reuven tells that to Shimon, if Shimon still says, I understand that Shemitah canceled this debt, but I want to give it to you as a matana, only then is Reuven allowed to accept the money. But that's once Shemitah is finished. During Shemitah year, since Shimon Taka does owe the money, if Shimon comes of his own volition, because I cannot sue him, I cannot pressure him, but if he comes of his own volition and say, I'm paying you back the debt, I can accept it. And I don't have to say, you don't owe it to me, because you Taka do owe it to me. The only difference, therefore, according to the Rush, between year 7 and year 8, is that during year 7, if Shimon chooses of his own kindness and his own conscience to pay back the loan, I can accept it from him without qualification. Whereas by year 8, if he chooses to pay back the loan because his conscience is bothering him, I have to say, Shemitah canceled it, you don't owe me the money. And only if he says, al pichein, I still want to give you a matana, then only then and only then may I accept it from him. So according to the Rush...
Isn't it Ribis then?
What's that?
Isn't it like Ribis?
No, it's not like Ribis at all. It's not like Ribis.
Why he's getting benefit from the loan?
It's a totally new thing. It's not. He's not paying you interest on a loan. It's a good question, is he? He's not paying you interest on a loan that exists. There is no loan anymore. The loan has disappeared into thin air. He wants, I can give you a gift of money if I want to. It's as if there was never a debt between us. So therefore, Shimon can give it to him as a gift.
Do I have to have...
And therefore, so just 1 second, Simi. So therefore, the Rush concludes by saying, if I cannot pressure someone during Shemitah year to pay me back my loan, I also no longer have the authority to submit the loans that I do have to Beis Din. They go hand in hand, says the Rush. So he says, "Uchamo she'en niskakin legabos hachov, kan ein niskakin lichtov Pruzbul miyad k'shenichnas shavias." Just like we don't allow a person to sue to collect his debts, we also don't allow a person any longer, once Shemitah has started, to submit his outstanding debts to Beis Din. Beis Din says, you don't have a right to collect this debt. What are you giving it to us for? It's none of our business anymore. It's out of our hands. It's out of your hands. It's only when it's in your hands can you give the debt over to us to collect. Okay? So now you see the sheet of the Rosh. The sheet of the Rosh makes the Torah sound very sensible. So the question then is, okay, so what's with the Beis Yosef? What's with the Machaber in Shulchan Aruch? How come the Shulchan Aruch doesn't acknowledge that? So it finishes the Beis Yosef. Simi, go ahead.
You answered the question.
Okay, so therefore, he says, Harei shekasav shechov hilva b'shvius goiva kol hashana umashma afilu al yedei beistin. But it turns out that if there is a loan that is made during the Shemitah year, it sounds like from the Rosh that you could collect it during the Shemitah year, even through a beistin. I'm sorry, I skipped a whole bunch. Sorry. Avol harambam beperak hanizkar kosav ein shvius mishametes ksafim ela besofa. The Rambam says just the opposite of the Rosh, and the Rambam says that Shemitah cancels debts at the end. Lefichach hilva es chaveru bashvius gova chobo kol hashana ucheshetishka chama belil Rosh Hashanah shel motzoi shvius avad hachoiv ad kan lashona. The Rambam says just the opposite of the Rosh, that you have the opportunity to lend someone money and to pressure them to pay back the entire Shemitah year. The Rambam does not reckon at all with the Rosh's understanding of this brisa, and he therefore says, "Harei shekasav shechov shehilva b'shvius gova kol hashanu umashma afilu al yedei beistin," and therefore you could submit a Pruzbul during year 7 according to the Rambam. Nothing happens at the beginning of the 7th year according to the Rambam. And it's on that basis that the Machaber says, and by the way, then he goes on to say that the Baal HaItter holds the same way as the Rosh, and the Ramban, Nachmanides, says that the Baal HaItter had the wrong girsa in the Brisa, which is what caused him to conclude that way. Presumably he might say the same about the Rosh. And therefore, the Beis Yosef finishes off his commentary over here, and he says, therefore, we go like the Rambam and the Ramban and the Rashba, who all say that nothing happens at the beginning of the 7th year.